Today I'm going to be going over a Mike Pence and Nikki Haley versus Joe Biden and Kamala Harris election prediction, as we did receive word yesterday night that Mike Pence is going to launch the 2024 campaign, possibly, and we also do know that Joe Biden will run again in 2024. So I am assuming that Kamala Harris will still remain Joe Biden's running mate, and Nikki Haley will become Mike Pence's running mate, as Donald Trump shows no support of Mike Pence during his 2024 campaign. So Mike Pence will be running without Donald Trump. Most likely without Donald Trump on the ballot, Mike Pence will be running. Mike Pence in general has a higher approval rating. Mike Pence is still down 4 percentage points, but Donald Trump is down 14 percentage points in the popular vote by approval rating. So Mike Pence is a lot more favored to win an election than Donald Trump is. But Mike Pence is not going to have that solid grab on the Rust Belt as Donald Trump had in 2016 against Hillary Clinton that allowed him to win the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Mike Pence is not going to be able to do that. He's not a businessman type. He's just not going to be able to win over voters. And that benefits Joe Biden, especially in the Rust Belt. Mike Pence is not very popular in the Rust Belt. His appeal, he might do well in minority voters, Sun Belt region, Georgia and Arizona. Same thing with Nikki Haley, but they're not going to be able to carry the Rust Belt as Donald Trump did in 2016. So, characterizing safe states for Mike Pence and Nikki Haley. So, Kansas is going to be one that is going to be, it was a 15 or 16% margin in 2020. It was a 20% margin in 2016. So it shrunk down. It's currently considered a likely state, but in general, I think it could go either way. I'm going to characterize it as likely. I know everybody is going to have a different opinion on how Kansas is going to shift. I'm going to characterize it as likely. It's just that's what happened in 2020. So, yeah. And Alaska also is going to be characterized as likely because of its margins being shrunk down in 2020. It was likely, while in 2016 it was a safe state for Donald Trump. I do think it's going to be a likely margin of victory. Also, Mississippi shrunk down. It was safe in 2016, and it is now likely. It's not likely. It is 16 percentage points, but it goes down an expected 1% every year. So I think it can be below that 15% mark, and it's going to be a likely state. Basically, the rest of the southern region is going to be red for Donald Trump, including not Donald Trump, Mike Pence and Nikki Haley in this region. So I think 116 electoral votes for Mike Pence and Nikki Haley. And Joe Biden is going to solidly carry Joe Biden and Kamala Harris solidly carrying the West Coast and New York and basically all of this northeastern region, not including New Hampshire, which is probably going to be a contested state for electoral votes. It's definitely going to be contested by both. So 156 for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But I do think Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico are going to be characterized as safe margins because their margin has been increasing. Like I said, these states have been shifting to the left for a long period of time now, since 2008. So I'm going to characterize them as safe states for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, including Hawaii and Illinois. That puts Mike Pence and Nikki Haley at 116 to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's 207 electoral votes. So Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have a much better starting point. Mike Pence and Nikki Haley not appealing to the voters in the Rust Belt. They're not going to be able to win Ohio and Iowa by 8% margins, similar to how George H.W. Bush and traditional Republicans carried them by about 4% margin. So I think it's going to be a leans margin. It's going to be a much smaller margin of victory than Donald Trump. In Texas, just like Ohio and Iowa, it's going to shrink down. It's not going to be a safe victory as it was anymore. I do think they're going to carry it by a leans margin between about 2 and 5 percentage points. It's not going to be as big because Texas has been shifting to the left, and Donald Trump is the most favored candidate to be able to win voters in Texas in 2024. In Florida, I think Mike Pence and Nikki Haley, they're going to bring back Florida to Republicans' ways. In general, Florida tends to vote red, even though it should not be characterized as a Republican state. It is a swing state. Just Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are not able to appeal to these voters because they did not win it in 2020. Donald Trump is more favored than Mike Pence and Nikki Haley in the state of Florida. But still, I do think Mike Pence is going to carry it just because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are not favored, as much as other Democratic candidates like Hillary Clinton, mostly because Joe Biden underperformed in Miami-Dade County. Cuban minority voters voted much more red. That shifted Florida 2 points to the right from 2016. So I think that's going to be a tilt margin for Mike Pence, under 1 percentage point. Mike Pence and Nikki Haley, probably around that area. In South Carolina, it is a likely margin, but because of Nikki Haley, she's on the ballot in South Carolina. That will bring it up to a safe margin because she's popular in that state. She was the former governor, former U.S. ambassador, so she's going to carry South Carolina by more than 15 percentage points, even though Donald Trump carried it by 12 percentage points, and it's been shifting to the left, just like the rest of the Sun Belt. Minnesota. It's always been a pretty substantial win for the Democratic Party. The Republican Party hasn't had too many shifts there, going either direction. So I'm going to give it to Kamala Harris and Joe Biden by a leans margin, about the same margin of victory as Texas is going to be in 2024, according to my prediction. In Maine, there are going to be 3 electoral votes going for Mike Pence and Kamala Harris, and one of them going for Mike Pence and Nikki Haley. So Joe Biden and Kamala Harris at 219, and Mike Pence and Nikki Haley over at 221. So next, I'm going to characterize the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt is a big area Joe Biden can perform well. Michigan, definitely a region Joe Biden can perform well in Michigan. Joe Biden performs really well in Michigan. He won it by 3 percentage points. It's going to be I think it's going to be about the same margin of victory. Mike Pence does not appeal to these voters as Donald Trump did. Neither will Nikki Haley. So I'm going to give Michigan to Joe Biden by a leans margin. Pennsylvania is going to be a smaller margin. I think this will be about a percentage point, maybe even under a percentage point, maybe about a percentage and 1.5. But it's still going to be a victory for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They are favored to win the state of Michigan and Pennsylvania. In Wisconsin, in general, if you look at the margin of victory in Wisconsin, it was only 0.5 in 2020, or I think 0.6. I think Kamala Harris and Nikki Haley might not be the most favored candidate, but this is a very close race. This is a state that could go either way. I'm going to give it to Mike Pence and Nikki Haley because of how small the margin is in general, because these areas are losing minority voters as we go further into 2030, as we get closer to 2030 and 2040 and the future. These states are going to become more conservative. I still think that Mike Pence and Nikki Haley are going to carry Wisconsin just because it tends to vote more to the right than Michigan and Pennsylvania. In New Hampshire, the reason New Hampshire is a blue state is, there really aren't minority voters in New Hampshire. Most of the population is white, and 70% of white Americans tend to vote to the Republican Party. But the reason I'm saying that New Hampshire can still be a Democratic state, even though it has a huge white majority, is because a lot of the white people, a lot of the Americans a lot of the white population in New Hampshire actually votes blue for the Democratic Party, which is very interesting. Just like how Cubans and Hispanics and Latinos in Florida vote for the Republican Party a lot more than other minority voters in the South. So New Hampshire, a lot of the white voters tend to vote either way, just depending on how they vote. I still characterize it as a leans margin of victory for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in New Hampshire. Or I would probably characterize it as tilt because Nikki Haley on the ballot. She is popular there. So, in general, I think it could be a smaller margin of victory than Biden in 2020, which was 7%. That was a likely margin. So I think it's going to be about a percentage point or so for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in New Hampshire. Whether it's Mike Pence as the vice president, Nikki Haley as president, or vice versa, I mean, it doesn't really make too much of a difference when it comes to, the electoral map. In North Carolina, African American turnout, yes, but still, the Sun Belt still has some of its red roots. It still has a lot of voters who tend to vote Republican. North Carolina has almost between a fifth and a fourth of its population voting for the African Americans, voting mostly Democratic. But there are still lots of voters in the suburbs who tend to vote, either way. I think Mike Pence and Nikki Haley can do well in the state of North Carolina. It's going to be a small margin. In the state of Georgia, also, I'm going to characterize it as a tilt margin for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I think it's going to be a victory for them. Just depending on, it was very close. It was also between Ossoff and Purdue, and I think the state still can go red. It is not characterized as a blue state yet, but it will be soon. In Arizona, I'm going to give it to Mike Pence and Nikki Haley just because you look at Maricopa County, that really determines who wins the election. It has gone blue, but I still think they can win over these voters there. Also in Nevada, the same thing. It was a red state, now shifted blue, but I think it could go back to its red ways. Because if you look at Carson City, Washoe County, Clark County, which is Las Vegas, it's shifted pretty far. As a big city, shouldn't be that close. It's a lot more conservative than LA and a lot of other cities in California and the West Coast in general. So I think if they can just run up the numbers in Washoe County, which is Reno area, which is a very tight, contested area, sort of like the bellwether of Nevada, and they can do that in Clark County in Nevada, in Las Vegas area, then they can flip that state red. I think that's my basic election prediction. I forgot to add Nebraska's 2nd district for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. So that will put Mike Pence and Nikki Haley at 280, to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris at 258. That will put Mike Pence and Nikki Haley, that will give them the victory. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, leave a like down below, and I'll see you guys next video. Peace out.